In my last year of seminary, Jill and I lived with a family in Chicago. Reverend Brett Lortie, the father of that family, is now the minister at First San Antonio, and he was about 38 at the time and in seminary with me. His wife was a teacher, and their son was in high school. The breakfast table became a place where Brett and I would process our ministry experience and dream about our lives to come. Many of our fears were articulated about what kind of churches we wanted to serve and whether or not there were enough healthy churches to go around for all the ministers we knew and believed in. We both also knew ministers at varying stages of their ministry who were tired and frustrated and who no longer seemed to be fed by their work. We were motivated at the time to do whatever it took, not just to survive in our new roles, but to thrive there. We were at the beginning of a process, the beginning of a new career, for most of our colleagues, a second career, and so not without worldly experience. We began reaching out to other seminarians and newly ordained ministers and asking them whether or not they shared our concerns and how they managed their anxiety. There was a common fear, a fear of selling out somehow and not being true to our own calling, a fear of letting the religion that had saved us turn into the very thing that we were struggling against. And yet we all understood the value of the institution and the importance of the individual and the tension that that created. We knew that there were healthy churches in our movement and healthy ministries, where the relationship between the two was both mutually challenging and stimulating. We wanted to know what those successful ministries and churches had in common that kept them learning and thriving and resilient. So Brett and I were motivated by our conversations with our colleagues to harness our idealism and our criticism and our excitement. We wanted to name those impressions to a movement, name the ideas to the movement in which we were about to become leaders. And we wanted to put those ideas in print. We wanted to be able to bookmark that moment so that we might reflect on where we are now sometime in the future. And we wanted to see if we are as naive and impractical as most new anythings happen to be. For me specifically, I knew that I was coming to one of the most influential churches in Unitarian Universalism. And I wanted to share some of the power and the influence that I have been granted by the privilege of serving here. All Souls is fortunate to house a press, and it is a press that is separate from our denomination. And its goal is to publish works that both benefit the movement and that might not otherwise make it into print. Our book is the third book by that press, and the press is named Jenkyn Lloyd Jones Press, after prolific minister Reverend Jenkyn Lloyd Jones, whose robe actually hangs in a plexiglass box down by the chapel, and whose ministry helped to shape many of our churches today, and whose family still walks the halls of this church, shaping our ministries. The first book published by Jenkyn Lloyd Jones Press was The Almost Church, written by Mike Durall, and is read by Unitarian Universalist congregations and boards all over the country. The second is called Living a Call and was published 2 years ago. It is a collection of essays that explores how our ministers are living out their calls in our denomination and the difficulties in order to do so. And the third is a book that I co-edited with Reverend Brett Lortie called Reverend X, How Generation X Ministers Are Shaping Unitarian Universalism. We launched that book at General Assembly, our annual national meeting this year, where Marlon preached his sermon that you heard a few weeks ago. We presented a workshop on the book with a panel of authors and received some really incredible feedback. Now, once Brett and I had gathered all of those voices who agreed to write up their feelings and fears about being a new minister in the movement, we realized that we all had something else in common. We were all part of what has been labeled Generation X. It has been said that Generation X is the most ignored, most misunderstood, and disheartened generation our country has seen in a long time. It is difficult to define who belongs to Generation X. While most believe that they are the generation after the boomers, no one agrees on where it begins and where it ends. Such is the nature of Generation X. In a September 23rd, 1996 article in USA Today, 6 sociologists and social theorists defined Generation X, and each gave a different answer. They ranged anywhere from those born between 1961 to 1981, consisting of 78 to 85 million people, to those born between 1965 to 1976, which only constitutes 46 million people. Although Generation X appears to be the accepted term, other labels have been tried. We've been referred to as the 13th generation, which would be the 13th generation since the founding of our country. We have been called baby busters. And 20-somethings have also been used, although I am no longer 20, as the children have pointed out. The term Generation X came from a book written in 1991 by Douglas Copeland by the same name. It is a fictional book about 3 strangers who decide to distance themselves from society in order to get a better sense of who they are, a kind of radical Walden, so to speak. He describes the characters as underemployed, overeducated, intensely private, and unpredictable. Copeland took his book's title from another book called Class by Paul Fussell. Fussell used X to describe a group of people who want to pull away from class status and money in society. Because the characters in Copeland's book fit that description, he decided on the title Generation X. The media picked up on elements of Copeland's characters' lives in American youth and labeled the entire generation Generation X. This definition has crafted a media stereotype that Generation X is made up of cynical, hopeless, frustrated, and unmotivated slackers who resist clothing labels, listen to alternative music, and still live at home because they can't get real jobs. Although this may describe some of my cohorts, it does not match my experience of most.